Today we're having a look at the Steam Deck, but in 1080p. So let's go ahead and check it out! Welcome to Mike Techs It Out. I'm Mike, and we're going to have a look at a few games in 1080p on the Steam Deck. And the main reason is I've just been using this as a handheld, but I haven't really thought about using it docked, especially because I have the GPD Win and I have an eGPU connected to that. So I pretty much just use that when I want to play something on my TV. But if this is the only thing you have, can this cut it at 1080p. I've tested 5 of the most demanding games that I have. Obviously, if you're playing games that don't have as high-end graphics, you can probably get away with more frames than what I got. But I just want to see how the experience would be at 1080p because I feel like that's kind of the minimum for most TVs and monitors that you'd want to run at. From my experience with testing, at least when hooking up to the capture card, it's still output at 720p. I actually had to go in the game's individual settings and change the resolution to 1080p, and then I got the 1080p options in the game. So if you are trying to output this at 1080p, you might have to change it on a per game basis if you don't get the options when you hook it up to a TV or a monitor. So I started with Horizon Zero Dawn, which for some reason defaulted to Ultra, which it wasn't happening. I'm pretty sure it's probably because I played it on my desktop last and I do run it on Ultra on there. But I hit the button to see what the recommended setting was, which is the original setting, which is basically the PS4 graphics settings, which I was getting around 24 frames per second. It was a smooth 24, I'm not gonna lie, but obviously that's not considered playable. You would consider 30 playable. So for this game, I ended up putting it on FSR quality, and then after that, I got a consistent 30 frames per second. Obviously, FSR is upscaling, so technically I'm still really running it at 720p at that point, but I found it to be the best compromise between graphics and performance. Next, I hopped in the God of War. I was already actually using FSR on this game, and again, running it at the original settings, which is equivalent to the PS4 graphics. So with FSR on and just changing the setting to 1080p, still getting above 30 frames. It was a pretty smooth experience. But turning FSR off, I immediately went down to around 25 frames per second, so very similar to Horizon, which makes sense, they're both Sony games. But with FSR, again, it was a good compromise between visuals and resolution without having to set the graphics to low to get above that 30 frames per second hump. Next, I wanted to play something that was multiplayer, so I hopped into Halo Infinite. I just played a game of Rumble Pit, basically Slayer, free-for-all. So I just ended up putting it on 1080p. The settings were already at low for this game by default, so I just left the settings the same, and I was getting around 40 frames per second in game. This was kind of inconsistent. There were a lot of drops, and in a multiplayer competitive game, that kind of ruins the experience somewhat. Like, I felt like when I was playing handheld and I was getting around the upper 40s to 50 frames per second at 720p, I was definitely a lot more competitive. I was barely able to get any kills. Actually, I don't think I got any kills during this match with the entire game. I think I ended up with like -2 because I accidentally killed myself twice. Look, I suck. I can't fully blame the Steam Deck for that. But I feel like 720p felt a lot more playable even though the frame count wasn't that different. Next is Elden Ring, which probably is by far one of the easiest games to run on the Steam Deck. So I was able to just drop the quality to medium and I was still maintaining a comfortable 30. Like, it was around 29 to 30, but it felt very smooth. There wasn't really any drops. And this was like with very intense weather going on in the area that I'm in. So I was actually really impressed with Elden Ring. Obviously, I could probably drop it to low to get even more frames, but I was looking to, again, have a good compromise between graphics and gameplay. Now, the last game I tested was Cyberpunk. So for Cyberpunk, I actually just used the Steam Deck preset, and I just bumped up the resolution to 1080p. And it was terrible. I don't know what is going on with this game, but yeah, it was like in the mid-teens as far as frame rates. And even when dropping some of the other settings, it still seemed to not affect it that much. Like, I feel like I got a few more frames, but didn't get anywhere close to 30, which was like the opposite experience of when I played it at 720p, where it was very playable. But I do find the graphic settings on this game very weird, because I've noticed this on my regular PC too. Like, I'll change some of the settings and it doesn't feel like it's really changing that much. So I think this is more just a Cyberpunk thing, because I don't understand how it goes from being like playable at 720p to like not playable at all just by changing the resolution. But I'll just chalk that up to Cyberpunk being Cyberpunk and not being well optimized still, even though it's had 3,000 patches. But yeah, those were the 5 games I tested. Again, I was just trying to go for something more intensive. I'm probably going to add some new games soon. Like, I'm planning on getting Miles Morales, and I'm probably going to get a Final Fantasy VII Remake now that I don't have my PS5 anymore. So I'll be interested to see how those games run on the Steam Deck and maybe come back and revisit this whole 1080p thing in the future. But overall, I think my recommendation is just to leave it at 720p, because And the games like God of War and Horizon, where I had to turn on FSR, technically it was just rendering it at 720p anyway. It was just doing the upscaling in-game versus doing the upscaling with your monitor or your TV, depending on what you connect it to. Now, if you have a monitor that doesn't have a good upscaler, then maybe doing FSR might be the better option. There also is an FSR option in the Steam Deck settings in general. So if the game, like for instance with Halo, I could have turned on that setting, but I just wanted to go based off of in-game settings. So there is an overall Steam Deck menu setting for FSR that you could also enable. But yeah, if you connect it to a monitor and 720p looks good, I would just stick to that. Like for instance, I played God of War on my 27-inch 1080p monitor downstairs, and it looked really good. I couldn't even tell that it was running at 720p, to be honest. But yeah, if you're on like a smaller 1080p monitor anyway, you're probably not really going to notice that much of a difference between 720 and 1080p, and the performance loss doesn't really seem worth it to me. If I'm playing this docked, I'm probably just going to leave this at 720 and just deal with the upscaling from my monitor. And again, like I said earlier in the video, it also depends on what kind of games you're playing. If you're playing like a puzzle game or something like that, of course you could bump up the resolution. You could probably bump it up to 4K if you wanted to, and it would still be good. But yeah, overall the Steam Deck is still super impressive. I'll be interested to see if the next Steam Deck might have USB 4 and you can do an eGPU, because that will really take this thing to the next level. For now, the performance is pretty good as far as a docked experience. It's just not anywhere near as what you could get with an external graphics card. But let me know what you think in the comments. I'm bringing this video to a conclusion, and if you enjoyed this video, then make sure to tell a friend, tell a coworker, like, share, and subscribe, and hit the bell notification to be notified when I drop a video, and always do at least 2 things at the same time.